Happy Wednesday, IBC family. Welcome to your midweek devotion. So this week I was reading the book that I've been doing for my devotions called Miracle in the Middle by Charlotte Gambill. And I came across this chapter where she said, and I'm going to read it, "It can be in the familiar that we most struggle to follow." And this quote really stuck with me. And I was reminded of something Gloria Copeland once said. She said, "In consistency lies the power and how consistent you are. But then if you put the in and you combine it with consistency, in consistency lies the power." There's power in both forms, being consistent and being inconsistent, right? And so that quote that she said, where it can be in the familiar that we struggle to follow, I really thought about that consistency piece. And in the book, she continued to talk about the familiar, and she gave this really good example. She gave the example of when Jesus fed the 5,000. That was a huge miraculous moment, right? It's this amazing thing that has happened. And he told his disciples right afterwards, after this miraculous thing happened, to get in a boat, row themselves across the sea, and go to Bethsaida. So basically, he was like, okay, the miracle moment's done. Now let's get back to the familiar of everyday stuff, right? Go get in the boat, row across, make it to the other side. They just witnessed this amazing miracle, a wondrous moment. They saw breakthrough, and now they're being asked to go row a boat across the sea, and Jesus didn't even go with them, actually. He was like, I'm not going to go, I'm going to go over here. So they had to go off and just do something that's more mundane after something so miraculous, right? So now let's put that story into our world. You just went to church and you had a rhema word. You had a miraculous moment, a breakthrough moment, something that the pastor said or during worship just resonated with you, and you're pushing through some of those storms and some of those seasons. But now you have to row your boat across the sea, right? Because Monday rolls around, and that is where your familiar happens. So Sunday, you have this great breakthrough, this amazing moment, this rhema word, the presence of God was real and with you. And now you're moving on into your week, and the familiar is about to happen. But this is where you have to maintain the consistency in the midst of all the familiar everyday stuff. This is the part that's hard. Back to that, it can be in the familiar that we most struggle to follow. You got this moment, and now you're trying to make it through the familiar. But that's where people suddenly start to struggle to follow. Because in order to keep what you received on Sunday, in order to keep what you know is right, I talked about the beginning, I believe, last week, where you started off your journey and you got your beginning and you put down your confessions. In order to keep following that, what do you have to do? You have to wake up early, seek God first, make your confessions, study the word, stay focused. But the familiar of everyday life begins to happen. And suddenly you're too tired, you're too busy, you're too frustrated with all the stuff that's mounting and piling up, and you're frustrated by all the realities that you're facing. You're too something, right? I know for me personally, I talked all about, going back to my beginning and doing those things, and I was on that, and then school started this week, and life just becomes chaotic, and you get so busy, and it gets frustrating, and you start to lose that path that you're supposed to be following, right? And now you're not maintaining that consistency anymore. You're confessing sometimes, and I need to get in my Bible time, and I'm just going to pray really quick and call it a day. And it becomes something like a check mark on your list of things to do, and you're familiar, right? You're rowing across your week, and you feel like Jesus is sometimes there with you, and then, I don't know, because you're just getting so busy by all the other stuff. What happens when you row a boat? Let's go back to that analogy. When you're rowing a boat, your oar is guiding you. But when you become tired, you're not paddling right anymore, right? So you're rowing, and then you're starting to get tired, and you're like, maybe your oar starts to go at a different angle, and instead of going straight across the sea, you start to curve, and you start to take a different path. Why? Because you're not maintaining the consistency of your row. You're starting to struggle in this mundane paddling, and so now you're starting to tilt, and the boat's starting to go this way. Or you're still going straight, but you're slowing way down. And if you stop paddling altogether, then you're just sitting there in the middle of the sea, right? Rowing that boat across the sea takes effort, it takes strength, and it takes focus, right? It takes You got to just sit there and take focus. And it's work. It's work to maintain what you know to do during the familiar of your week. It takes work and effort and focus to prioritize God in your life and prioritize your confessions and make sure that no matter how busy of a day your day gets or how familiar everything becomes, you're not missing out on that time with God. You're maintaining that consistency because that's where the power lies. So similar to the example that she gave, she said being told they had to do something very ordinary after they had been involved with something extraordinary was not the most appealing. Sometimes you come off of such a high on Sunday or in your moment with God, and then the week starts and all of the realities pile up, and suddenly the extraordinary gets lost in all the ordinary. And the middle is where you give into the I don't feel like it emotions. That goes back to that consistency that I just talked about. When you're getting into the familiar, it's easy for me this morning to say, I don't feel like getting up at 5 a.m. to ensure that I have my Bible time with God before my day starts, right? You start to get into that, I don't feel like it. But if you're rowing that boat across the sea, what happens when you say, I don't feel like rowing anymore? Well, then you're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to continue on the path that you're supposed to follow. Or I don't feel like paddling quite like that. Or I just want to do it this way. Then you're going to turn your boat, right? When you start to give into those feelings of I don't feel like it, emotions, that's often the place where delays or excuses will attempt to frustrate our following. That's a quote from her book. And that's the familiar of everyday life when we are waning in our consistency. But like I said at the beginning, consistency is where the power is. That consistency is so important. I've heard a lot over the last Sunday in different encouragements from IBC leadership all about distractions. And sometimes becoming too familiar with your place is a distraction. It's a distraction to give into those feelings and to just give into the familiar of your week. So let's go back to our quote from the beginning. It can be in the familiar that we most struggle to follow. Yet in the familiar is where it is imperative to follow. So important. Because like that example of the rowing the boat, when you stop going where you're supposed to go. You stop moving forward. You stop the direction to get yourself out of your storm and out of your season. I liken it to driving a car. My whole life I keep hearing car accidents happen when you're closest to home, right? Everyone's heard that. Why? Because you're too familiar with where you are. That's why the majority of accidents, it's a statistic, happen close to home. Because people get familiar with where they are and they begin to slack off. No longer are they staying at 10 and 2. No longer are they watching their mirrors or checking their speed. You begin rolling past the same stop signs that you've stopped at a billion times because no one's ever at them. So you just, my house is a block away. You kind of do like that California roll and you stop really quick and go. It's okay to take off your seatbelts. We're only 2 blocks away from home, right? What's happening? You're getting lost in the familiar and you're losing your focus. You're losing what's important. That's why it's imperative to maintain in the familiar. But it's that familiarity in driving that's cost people their lives. I've actually known people personally who have died close to their homes. And it's when you get so laxed in your familiar in the spiritual sense, that is when Satan strikes, right? The Bible says that he walks about like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. He's constantly looking for what? To see who's gotten lost in their familiar. Who's stopped paddling the boat? Who's starting to dip their oar a certain way and go a different direction? Who's slowing down? Who just stopped paddling altogether? Right? That's what he's seeking for. It's when we lose our consistency in God that we lose our power. It goes back to that inconsistency lies the power. But when you're inconsistent, there's power in that too. Power to stop you from moving forward. Stop you from getting to what you know is yours. Stop you from reaching that rhema word and that miraculous moment that you might have had Sunday at church or in a Bible time with God. It's inconsistency that lies the power. It is being strong in our familiar and in the mundane of the middle that we grow our faith and renew our minds. So it's being strong in the familiar and the everyday. If you're staying consistent and you're paddling that boat, that's where you're renewing your mind. That's where you're growing your faith. That's where you're propelling yourself forward, moving forward through your season and through your storm. And one thing that I'll end with that she says is she also gave an example of somebody on an airplane. And she got on an airplane one time, and the lady next to her, when they gave the safety instructions, was really reading the safety manual, and she was checking under her seat, making sure all of it was there. Well, Charlotte Gambill was just kind of, it's flown a billion times, right? You get used to the familiar. But then she started thinking, if this plane went down, she's happy she's next to that lady, because that lady is staying focused and guided, right? She's maintaining focus in this familiar moment. And sometimes, just like that lady, how she was going to rely on her, you're staying focused and vigilant in your familiar, not necessarily for yourself, but for someone else. Maybe during the week a friend calls and they need help and guidance. If you're sticking strong and you're staying the course and you're paddling through, then what you're reading in your Bible and seeking God about is going to come out of you, and it's going to help them. You're there to help them through their flights. So just remember, don't get lost in the familiar. Don't let the struggle of the familiar cause you to stop rowing your boat or to start to turn a different direction. Stay the course. Stay strong in what you know you should do throughout your familiar, so that you can be not only a help and a strength for yourself, but to those around you as well. Have a blessed day. Bye.